Ready to level up your career? Text DISH to 44043 now to dive into a world of exciting technician opportunities at DISH. From cutting-edge technology to a supportive work environment, DISH offers the perfect platform for your success. Connect with us today to discover how you can be part of a dynamic team driving innovation. Connect today and join the DISH family, where innovation meets opportunity. Text DISH to 44043 to kickstart your journey towards a rewarding career.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRMArchaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRMArchaeology Podcast, episode 272 for September 6th, 2023. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about what phase or class 1, 2, and 3 means in cultural resources management. So bust out your textbooks because the CRMArchaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Heather.
Good morning. Sorry, Chris.
I'm not gonna say California because you're all in California. I was going to mention that.
That was what I was waiting for. In California.
Yeah.
Hi, Chris.
All right, and then we've got Bill, also in California, if that helps.
Every day.
And then Andrew with our topic today, also in California. I'm the only one that's not.
That's right. One of us does not
Chris?
belong today. How's it going, everybody?
Good. I am currently in, I heard Heather ask, I'm currently in northern Washington State, actually northwestern, up in the north, right outside North Cascades National Park. So it's a pretty cool area. We're under the smoke veil of Canada right now. So, you know, can't really see anything, but yeah.
Still.
Anyway.
Are you near Mount Baker?
We're just south of Mount Baker. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Beautiful.
So yeah, it's a cool area. All right. Well, Andrew's got the topic today. Andrew, what are we doing here?
All right, here we go. So today I'd really like to discuss what we think of as a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3 in CRM archaeology. And I picked this topic for a few reasons. First, I was talking to Chris the other day, and Chris just brought this one up. Hey, why don't we do phase 1, 2, 3? And at the same time, as is so often with topics like this, I had also recently asked my students to define a phase 1 and a phase 2. And some of their descriptions weren't exactly what I was expecting. And then I took a step back and I was like, wait, that's not wrong, though. And so I wanted to talk about this because different places, different archaeology crews, they define where the shift between phase 1 and phase 2, or what specifically is in these different phases, it's defined all over the place. So I thought we could talk about our experiences of these 3 phases, what we think it is, and see if we can come to some sort of agreement on how we think it should be done. Okay, Chris, I already see you have something to say. What's up?
Well, just before we even talk about what 1, 2, and 3 means, we need to talk about the terminology, right? Because some people, especially on the West Coast, might be thinking, what do you mean phase? Because a lot of times it's called class, right? Class 2, class 3. I know that the BLM in Nevada calls them class 3, like inventories or something like that, cultural resources inventory, when you're doing a pedestrian survey. So class, phase, somewhat interchangeable, and it just depends on where you're at, to be honest.
That's cool. In my experience, it's always been phase, but my experience is 7 different firms or something, all in Southern California-ish. So then
you get Tom King, who doesn't like any of the numbers, which actually I agree with him. The more that I've been working, the more that I've been involved in CRM, and the more I actually agree with him, because I think that having an understanding and labeling each one of these efforts by what they actually are would be more helpful than having these different the phase 1 or class 1, 2, 3. But you still need to work within the agencies that are overseeing the work that you're doing. So you still have to have that terminology, obviously, but I think it's really important that people understand what the chronology but what are the steps towards doing what you're doing out in the field, and why. Why do they happen in this order? Because no matter what they're called, they all typically happen in the same order and for the same reason. So,
yeah, good point.
In terms of looking into this and how we define it, I realized, I'm like, hey, maybe I should look at my own textbook that I give my students. Maybe that would be good. And so I do recommend, I've been using this one for years, Cultural Resources Archaeology by Newman, Stanford, and now Harry. This is the second edition. I believe this is the most current one. I really like this textbook for a field class that is CRM angled, because it takes that CRM bent and it spends a bit more time on the laws and that kind of stuff than it does on this is how to hold a shovel. Because I find that this is how to hold the shovel or this is how to measure a meter. We can all do that. We can all learn it pretty easy, but the more what are the laws around this is the difficult part. This book, chapter 4, is just called the Phase 1 process. So I looked through it and I'm like, okay, so what do they say a Phase 1 is? So we'll see if our experiences go with this. They say that a Phase 1, let me see, it refers to the identification of archaeological resources through reconnaissance and intensive survey mentioned in the Secretary of Interior's standards for identification. So even already, as with so much of the law, it tells you what it is, but there's so much possibility for interpretation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
and how do you do that?
Right.
That's what you do. That's what it's for. But how do you do that?
Yeah. Is that digging? Is that no digging? Is that just looking at a map? So what I think we'll find is as we go through this, that we're all sort of right, that you can't do this wrong as long as you have some sort of plan and it kind of moves forward in a thoughtful manner. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we'll all argue about, oh no, you can never dig in a Phase 1. It's like, well, you can
definitely dig in a Phase 1.
Yeah.
Absolutely can dig in fact, it's necessary sometimes. Yep.
Yeah.
But I've heard people be very much like, nope, that's where you're just doing a record search. Phase 1 is record search, so looks like it's not.
That.
See, that's, and Chris, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, when I worked on the East Coast, which was where I got most of my experience to start before we moved west, it was a Phase 1 was basically your standard shovel test survey, right? 30-meter interval or 20-meter interval, whatever the standard was for the state. So you did the standard shovel test interval, and then Phase 2 was typically you go back to the hits, right? So you'd already done some slightly more detailed testing. Obviously, when you find a positive shovel test, you do the cruciform thing where you go in between those and you just kind of nail that down and you figure out where this thing is. And then you go back on a Phase 2 to those spots and you do more intensive shovel testing and or 1x1s on certain places, like around certain shovel tests that you dug, or maybe even backhoe trenching, depending on, what you've got available and what's going on. And then Phase 3 was always full scale block excavation, right? And that was always pretty much everywhere on the East Coast that I worked. Those were the rough definitions that were used. And then I come out here to the West and a Class 3 cultural resources inventory is pedestrian survey. You know what I mean? Like, at least for BLM Nevada. Yep. And I'm like, well, that doesn't match up at all. So,
right. Yeah. I think for me, when I'm trying to teach people that come in entry level and we're trying to explain to them, because it is just their heads are spinning no matter no matter where they come from, especially in some institutions where they're not taught about CRM at all. But what I try to explain is, number one, a Phase 1, if you want to use that Phase 1, 2, 3, but the steps are, first, absence or presence. We're looking for absence or presence of archaeological resources, period. 2, we found something. Now we need to evaluate it and determine whether or not it's significant. And so those 2 steps are your investigation, your assessment, whatever it is that you want to think, you want to call it, that gets you through whatever document that you are informing, whether it's a federal, state, or a local document. In California, that's CEQA. or NEPA, if it's a federal project, that's what's informing and telling the agency whether or not you have an impact, adverse effect on a resource or not, period. The last step is data recovery. And that's where, if you can't avoid it, you're trying to collect all the information in order to at least retain the data potential so that we don't lose everything if a site is unavoidable, feasibly unavoidable, or sorry, unavoidable, right? You cannot feasibly avoid. But that's mitigation. And that's what people sometimes don't understand. So that's what happens after you've already made the determination of impact or effect. And that's mitigation. It's completely separate. And trying to explain that to people that are new to it, it can be hard. But to me, it's either the first step is absence presence, no matter whether you're doing a record search or you're doing the survey or you're doing shovel test pits. And then the second one is we have something. What is it? And is it significant? And if it's significant, why is that important? It's important because if you have a significant resource, it's considered a historical resource, and now you have to, by law, avoid it. If you can.
I know Bill has something to say too, but so what you've just explained though, Heather, is that's still phase one though, right? That's the hard part, I think.
So phase one is that absence presence. Phase two is your evaluation. That's I have a site, I need to evaluate it. I need to determine whether or not it's significant. That is, if you're going to use the phases, that's your phase two. Sometimes you need to dig in order to determine if you have, number one, do you have a site? And number two, if you have a site, what's your extent? What's the vertical and horizontal extent of that site? That's phase one.
I think so that's the part, like, that's the part I want to make sure that, everyone understands as we talk about, like, where would we break? Like, now we're in a phase
They mush together. They mush together. Sometimes you can do an extended phase one, as we call it here. You can do an extended phase one and you get enough information during that digging to determine whether or not you have a significant resource. And you don't even need to do a phase two. So I'll be quiet.
That was
Bill,
all great.
What's up?
Yeah, and like over to the side, I've been looking up what every state that I've worked in calls a phase one, and shocker, half of them don't even ever spell it out, and then the other half don't ever tell you the steps of what specifically you do, right? So there's all these things from the Department of Office of Archaeology, the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, right? Or the State Historic Preservation Office, the Arizona State Museum. None of them is like, step one, folks get in car, drive to project area. Yeah. Step two, start walking in a line next to each other. Like they never actually say that, right? So It sounds like there's an unlimited amount of ways to do this right and wrong, right? With zero guidance. None of these states are really actually explaining what it is. But Heather's exactly right that there is a whole process of going out to look for sites. But the other half of it is the client, right? Because you need to know where in the world this is even happening. Like, what is the area of potential effect, which is a bounded geographic region that they plan on doing the undertaking. Like, that's the reason why they even need any compliance. So if you don't have a APE, then who really cares? And then just like Heather was saying, the vertical extent too matters, because as Chris was mentioning in the Southeast, some of those soils are a bit shallow, and you can dig a 30 to 40 centimeter shovel probe and you're good to go. In Washington State, depending on where you're at, you might go 130 beyond the length of your shovel, and then you have to start augering down, right? So why would you even do that if that's just a bike trail? That's going to be way below where they ever would even be digging. But if they're putting in a parking garage, you may never even be able to get to, I worked on a project that was like multi-years long in downtown Seattle. The town burned, and then they just bulldozed it all into Puget Sound. So there's a city there at a certain depth. And, the cultural layer is who knows how thick of buildings from like 1883 that were just poured into the ocean. So what, like, where's your APE? They were digging a tunnel for a freeway way below and through and into that layer. Otherwise, like if you were just going to fix the sewer pipe, it didn't matter, because after they did that whole shoveling the city into the bay, they also hydraulically rinsed down hills. So there's feet and feet of sediment that's like, unconsolidated glacial till and all kinds of other stuff, soils that were all rinsed down on top of that city. So unless they're going like 60 feet deep, who cares about that old Seattle? Because you're never even going to get to it. So your vertical APE, you're above the cultural layer anyway. That's not really a part of what you would need to have considered, right? So then the other piece too is, the records check, and sometimes companies are like, hey, Bill, just get out there and start walking in the desert. And, when you find a thing, start marking it down, and don't worry, we'll get the records check to you. No, the first half should be, once you have an APE, what has anyone ever done there? What kind of sites would you ever find? Because, if your idea, like Chris was saying, of digging shovel probes every 30 or 40 meters, but all the sites that have ever been found in that area are these really small, lithic concentrations or ceramics and lithics together, and they're usually like 3 or 4 meters apart, you're going to miss probably every single site that's ever been found in that county if they're all just lithic scatters, right? So you might need to have a different kind of strategy of maybe your transects are closer, or, maybe you do them diagonal and stagger them, right? There's all these documents on how you can do a shovel probe survey to maximize, coverage. But at the end of the day, if you don't know where in the world that's happening and what anyone else has ever done in that area, then it's difficult to design the kind of survey that you would to go out there and ground truth that things exist in the APE.
Yeah. All right. Well, definitely got some stuff to say on that. But first, Bill, you were on was that the Alaska Way Viaduct project?
Yeah. Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
That big machine is still buried under there, from what I hear. They can't get it out.
Oh, well, it joins the crowd of like entire town, cities and stuff. What's crazy about that whole thing is we had a great geomorphologist, Charles Hodges. This guy knew, I don't even really know what to say. I've seen him encourage us to dig deeper and found like paleosols and other places that are at depths that should have been glacial till. The guy's just really good at reading soils. And from the maps of where they were going, he said, on this area, they pushed an entire town in there. So you shouldn't take a coring machine through it. And so they were saying, oh, well, that's 1800s, what would they possibly have? Steel, right? Like steel is a key piece. And that's exactly what that thing hit. Sure. A building that had iron steel, and it ran into it and got all tangled up, and they never could get it out. Not only that, but they modeled the whole thing after the big dig in Boston, which was the, most expensive fiasco of tunneling ever. And when I lived in Seattle, I voted against that 3 times, and they still did it, the most expensive option. I voted against it 3 times, and they still did it anyway. And then I voted for legalizing cannabis, and then they didn't do that until after I moved away. So don't vote the way I want. If you want change, vote the opposite of me.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'll take a break and come back on the other side and keep talking about this back in a minute.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals. That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your sites will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
Welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 272, and we're talking about the phase class system, and I don't mean field tech, crew chief, or project manager as a class system, although that's definitely a class system within archaeology.
Oh, that could be like a whole article.
or Star Trek planet classes. We're not talking about Star Trek either.
Exactly, exactly. So,
what is a class 3 planet? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I could actually tell you that, but I won't. Let's not get into that yet. So anyway,
you were tempted for a second there, Chris.
I know.
Class M.
Well, I will tell you, they didn't make that up. Like they that came from actual like astrophysics or astrobiology, whichever we need to talk about. But anyway, so I did want to mention something was we were talking about all this on the last one. I wrote down a little note here. Really, why do we care about all this, right? And it depends on who you are, right? Because if you are Heather and you're writing proposals and you're looking at things that are coming out from agencies and saying, okay, so they want a class 3 inventory, or they want a phase 2, or they want something like that. Well, first off, they're going to define it, but it also helps when you're just looking at the blurb and you're trying to figure out what you're going to bid on. You understand what you're looking at, hopefully, by just reading it, right? And understanding what that means. So that's one audience for those, that's why you need to know that. But as a field technician or crew chief for somebody who's traveling around looking for work, and you're looking on Shovel Bums, you're looking on Arc Field Work, you're looking on Facebook for that matter. There's a lot of job postings coming out there. It helps to just know what you're getting into, right? Like if you don't have the gear to do a full block excavation, or you're just like not interested in it and you'd rather go hike in the desert and do survey, you really need to know what these terms mean, right? And there's the other thing too. I mean, I've excavated in the high desert in Nevada. It can be fun. It can be real crappy. Like, do you want to swing a pickaxe the whole time, or do you want to go on a hike? Right? That's really what the question is. And if you know what you're reading there, just in case the job posting was not very well written, they don't say exactly what you're going to do, but maybe they say we're going to do a class 3, or we're going to do something like that, and they expect you to know what that means. Then this is a helpful conversation to have. So, yeah, Heather.
Yeah.
I think I love this conversation. We could go episodes and episodes on this, but I think it's so important at every level, or, for everybody, for each step of your career. I'd say for me as a project manager, I have been able to advocate for my clients multiple times, because I look at it from the spirit of why we're doing what we're doing. So, for instance, we had a project where we had done an extended phase 1, and we had done, it was backhoe trenches. We had done I think 120 backhoe trenches on a few acres. It was not, I did not want to do that many, but it was insistent through tribal consultation. They wanted this. Sometimes you have to realize that, you have to consider, what are you doing that's going to impact the site, obviously, more than what you're getting out of it. Like if you're going and digging the heck out of a site, like you're impacting it before we even get to the point where we're trying to consider how do we preserve it, right? So that can be dangerous. But anyway, for instance, I had one project where we had done, about 120 backhoe trenches, and then the agency's peer reviewer was insisting that we also do a phase 2. We had, so we have a site. We know we're in a site. We actually knew we were in a site. What we were trying to determine was what was the depth of disturbance at the site. We had clearly gotten every bit of information we needed to not only determine. So you're looking at a site trying to figure out, is this site significant? It's not just about, the whole site's significant. You avoid the whole site. That's not how it goes. You're looking at what areas within the site contribute to the significance of the site, right? Yeah. So there are some areas you may not have to avoid, and there are other areas that you will need to avoid. But this reviewer, who loves to sit on the fact that he has a PhD, but he doesn't know anything.
What are you trying to say?
I was just going to say, he better not have gone to my school.
And he was insisting that our client spend another $100,000 or whatever on a phase 2 when, listen, we've already found what we need to find in order to determine significance and contribution of significance. And more digging is just going to impact your site further. At least in the areas that were contributing to significance. So being able to understand.
I think I can save you, Heather. I think I can save us all with the textbook. The definition of phase 2, man. Watch this. Yes. The purpose of phase 2 testing and evaluation is to see whether archaeological sites identified during the phase 1 survey satisfy criteria for listing on the National Register of Historic Places.
Yes.
For a site to be eligible, it must have both significance and integrity. So that's what you could even show them. You could show them the textbook and be like, we did it.
Yeah. You know what? I won that argument. I was able to, took a lot of work. And the reason is because when people start saying phase 1, 2, and 3, and when you do this, and this is what Tom King says all the time, it's this concept that before I go to 3, I must have 2, right? That people are not able to get past the point that sometimes the 2 is not necessary, or the 2 has already been done through what you did for the phase 1.
I was going to mention that. So this was a thing that, especially when you were mobilizing backhoes, that would be a common, like a 1-2 type thing. And a lot of times this would end up happening. For example, if someone has already done a phase 1 in 1987 and they said that there was a farmstead with, lithics as well, right? And then they just never built the subdivision. And so those acres sat there for 40 years and no one ever went there. Well, now the rules are, that survey is old, which is good, especially nowadays when things can change so fast with climate change and stuff on just an acre of land just sitting out there that, it would make your head spin. You could find all kinds of stuff popping up that you didn't find in 1987. And so sometimes I've seen where they know there's a site there. It's already been proven, but it's just a long time ago. And so then the client's asking for, well, we have to do a phase 1 because, we need to see where things are at, how things have changed since 1987. But we already know there's a site there and we really want to build here now. So can we just also evaluate it basically at the same time and modifications of things, shovel probe surveys plus excavation units could be a possibility. If you've got backhoes, there could be a thing where you're identifying, buried surfaces and features and artifact horizons, where then you're going to backhoe off a little area so that then you dig down only a few centimeters and now you have some square units where you can have X amount of 1x1s or something like that, where it's just built in. So the backhoe is still digging trenches, moving laterally across the land, monitor still watching it, but we've got techs and crew chiefs digging actual units at the same time. I've seen that happen too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where does the boundary lie between the 1 and the 2 in that case?
Well, and Bill, you're kind of reminding me with just, knowing what you're looking for and just trying to figure all this out, right? You were mentioning something in the first segment, phase 1 of this podcast, if you will, that we were, talking about going out there and doing your pedestrian survey or doing shovel testing and not having the records check done. The records check. Oh, yeah. I just had to mention this. One of the other things the records check does is, well, first off, it's 2023. The chances of you being the first archaeological crew in an area are pretty slim, right? Like somebody's probably already done something in that area or near that area close enough. And there could be some, one-off cultural, feature or something like that you're looking for, or artifact type or something that you may have never seen before or didn't know was in that area, and your brain and your eyes might just not be attuned to it. And one specific example I can think of was an excavation I was doing with another company in Clear Lake, California, out north of San Francisco, way up there. And the Native American monitor that we had on there, he asked me, can I do a presentation to your crew? Because we've got some stuff out here that, you may not have seen. And I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. Please do. And he was talking about these ear toggles that honestly, I'd never even found them before, but those big things that go in the big like ear holes and stuff like that. They had all kinds of different shapes of these, and he brought some in to show. And to be honest, I may not even have been looking for something like that. You know what I mean? You see something strange in your screen and you're going to pull it out. But if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, or you don't know what you should be looking for, then it makes it really difficult to just go in blind on a project.
Yeah.
You can, that means everything becomes suspect. But if you know something's in the area, your brain is just a little more attuned to it. So the record search really helps out in that respect.
Yeah, it's sad. I always feel it's sad when I go out and I didn't have the record search done when I left, because also a lot of times they'll pull the reports too. So just like you were saying about someone already did the survey, then you also read their narrative of what they did out there and what they found. And so it just makes you feel like you don't have everything you need to really be prepared for the job when you have not seen those reports and you have not seen what exists in the area.
All right. Well, that's a good spot to take a break, and we will move on to phase 3 of this podcast on the other side. Back in a minute.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals. That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Taco experts since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Welcome back to the CRMArch podcast, episode 272. We're talking about the phase class system, and we're in phase 3 now, so maybe we should talk about that. I don't know. Phase 3.
I think we're in recovery. Yeah. There's no data here. We're just in recovery. It's just in recovery. Phase 3 recovery.
Yeah. So, when I was working on the East Coast, it's really interesting because my very first CRM project was a phase 3 data recovery is what they called it. It was an excavation, and it coincidentally, I didn't dig a shovel test my first 2 years as a field tech, almost 3 years. I got on excavations the whole time. Every single project was a phase 3 excavation, and that can happen on the East Coast because they don't have the ability to avoid significant resources a lot of time, right? They have to dig it up, which means full-scale block excavation. Over here in the West, just move your pipeline 16 miles. Who cares, right? But over there, it's just your Walmart's got to go where the Walmart's got to go. You know what I mean? So it's It was crazy. I didn't even know what shovel testing or pedestrian survey was for my first 3 years in archaeology.
You know what? It's so funny, Chris. Your story is my story too. Yours, I have that same story in the West, but coastal California, same deal. I was in the world of phase 2s. I did 1x1s forever before I did what you're supposed to do. Anyway, Bill, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was going to say my first job was my first professional job all the time was in Western Washington, where it's Legend of Zelda using a machete to chop through blackberries, to set up a transect line for people to dig shovel probes. And then when they find stuff, you're like, oh my God, we've got to do another, 4 more shovel probes. And I've got to chop them all for this one person to dig 4 more and also chop a line for all the rest of my people. So we did a lot of shovel probes. My spine is now compressed from shovel probes. I mean, there was phase 2s, there was 3s, but the survey in Western Washington is walking through the forest and digging a hole every, 30 feet or whatever it says, 60 feet.
Mm-hmm.
What I was thinking about talking about in the last segment, first of all, was just to talk about the record search. I think, when we deal with clients, we even have it in the proposal that the next step, first we have a record search, and that next step as far as timing, because a lot of clients want timing and they're going to hold you to it. Yeah. Our timing does not start until we receive the record search. And unfortunately in California, for those that don't work in California, there's a gatekeepers on the record searches. It's not as easy as just going in and getting, the records. You have to contact the information center. Some allow in-person searches, some do not. And then some have this huge backlog. It could take months to actually get the results back. And so, sometimes we get creative and we'll say, okay, we'll do a survey for you without the record search results first. But if we do find something, we may have to go back out and it will cost you another survey. But, just to kind of keep things moving, we try to do that. But I think that people, especially those that are currently working, that, our crew out there that are doing the really important work of, the surveys and the shovel test pits and the data recoveries. I think it's really important, especially for those that haven't been doing it very long, to understand that just what Bill was saying earlier is that there's so much that goes into determining why you do what you do. And, there's all this back work. It's not just we get the okay, we get the NTP, the notice to proceed from the client, and boom, we go out and survey. Or we get the record search and, we have the record search results. Now let's go out to survey. I mean, at least a good assessment, a good study does not do that. You have to look at the soils. You have to look at, your topos and aerials and determine your ground disturbance and what went on before, at least what you can determine from those maps. You do everything that you can to set yourself up before you even go into the field. You have to do all these things. And that's why, I do hear people, they're like, well, especially when people are moving from company to company, this company, I didn't have to dig that far down.
Yeah.
Right. That company, I was only digging this, or that company I had to dig, 180 centimeters, whatever. And there's a reason for that. If the person who's putting together the research design knows what they're doing, you can work in one project site. You can work in one that's like only 100 feet down, 300 feet down the road, and you have a complete different work plan because of the characteristics of that site. And so that's why, it's important. And that also goes into your different phases and why you can move fluidly between phase 1 and phase 2, but on other projects you can't.
Yeah. The other thing too that is an important consideration is your people, and I think Heather can tell us a lot more about this. Any company, like you're saying about the notice to proceed, but also the project location and the APE and the kind of resources that are there. Your company is going to have specialists that are good at certain things, right? There's going to be field techs who are, hardcore, and they can dig a lot of shovel probes, but their paperwork is always questionable, right?
Yes.
Whereas someone else who maybe doesn't dig as many holes, they are very meticulous and detail oriented and never make a mistake on that kind of stuff. There's also super remote locations. And then there's locations where we can seriously rent a minivan and just everybody hops out and we don't even really need any tools. And we just stand there and watch them, do a bunch of backhoe trenches, right? We don't need shovels. We don't need screens. We're just out there. So it matters on the kind of people that you're going to send out there and their availability, because they're also employed on other projects. And so sometimes you kind of hope that records check doesn't come back for another 10 days because the 3 key people that you want to be on this project that are seriously the difference between this thing coming in on budget or not really happening at all are out on another project. And if you pull them from that one, then there might be questions about, whether that one's going to come in. So the kind of project, it matters on which of your employees or who you're going to recruit to work on those projects. And the hiring manager, that's another major thing that goes into their calculations on each project and every single survey.
That's a great point.
You're just reminding me, like, we have a guy who's just super, he's amazing at digging accurately and very quickly, but he's terrible at his paperwork. And so there are times where it actually makes sense for us to put somebody with him that documents everything on the iPad of what he's doing. And he loves to dig, but he hates to screen. So they screen and they document. So you put people in pairs of 2. And sometimes that's best. And there's so many different, that's why I get frustrated sometimes when people try to compare, why was this done and assume that the person with the MA, right? That's always this, concept. The person with the MA doesn't know what they're doing. No, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't know what they're doing. But sometimes their decisions are based on all these other different, issues that,
thinking bigger.
That need to come to play. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about your guy who's accurate and quick, Heather. The thing I noticed when I really started doing shovel testing in the Southeast, which tell you what, anything that will get you to move to the West is consistent shovel testing in the Southeast, because, not only
just the Southeast, I'm from Idaho. So just the Southeast is already enough for you to be like, why are we here?
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. But it was something. There were some areas down on the coastal plain in the Carolinas and Georgia where, it's just sand. It's one strat. There's no soil change. There might be one soil change or something like that. And you're not digging 10 centimeter levels in your shovel test. There are some places where you do absolutely do that, but there's a lot of places where you dig stratigraphically, and down in the coastal plain was one of those places. And like I said, a lot of times your shovel test is going down as deep as the shovel will reach or the water table. And that's 80 centimeters to a meter. And Usually it's less than that for the water table starts seeping in, and then you're basically done. I mean, there could be more cultural stuff, but you just can't get any deeper because it's not possible with a shovel. Yeah, you can't do it. But the point is, I mean, sometimes I was on project where I would do, 100 to 150 shovel tests in a day, right? And that is just pulling the entire block of the shovel test into the screen, lifting it up. You've got a pile of pottery there, or you've got nothing. You put that in a bag, you tie it all up, and then you throw the dirt back in the hole and you move to the next one. And it was about 5-6 minutes between shovel tests when you're really moving. So to Heather's comment,
insane.
I know. To Heather's comment, you usually have 3 different attributes for people who can do that. And that's usually speed, accuracy, and stamina, right? Like how fast are they at the shovel test? Yeah. How accurate is their paperwork and their holes, their shovel test to begin with? And then can they keep that going all day and for the entire session? I would say you could usually pick 2 of those, and you're lucky if you get all 3. Hang on to that person.
Yeah.
Give them more money.
That's why I love being flexible in how you make up a team for a project. You cannot just wait for that perfect person. You have to work with who you have.
All right, hey everybody, this is Chris just jumping back in. We had a internet failure and some weird things happened, so we had sort of an abrupt end to our conversation, but we're going to bring this back in because one thing we realized, Andrew was trying to be consistent here, and he read the definition out of his little textbook there for phase 1 and phase 2, and now he's going to read us phase 3 so we can all know what that means. Finally.
All right, here we go. Yes, Mr. Consistency himself, Andrew Kinkella, reading. So what is a phase 3? So I like this here. According to the textbook, phase 3 data recovery commences when avoidance is not reasonably possible and when excavation or comparable archaeological investigation is deemed the most appropriate way to mitigate or offset the adverse effects. So phase 3 attempts the recovery, analysis, and dissemination of the anthropological information stored within the threatened part of the site matrix. The idea is to make the continued existence of the portion of the threatened site redundant. And of course, there's some controversy over that, but it's understandable in terms of the law. If successful, the site's information potential is captured by the process and contained in the archaeological assemblage, field records, laboratory analysis records, and reports. So there you go. That's what you're supposed to do in a phase 3.
All right, then. So basically dig it all up and put it in a lab.
Yep.
Yeah. I never really understood the redundancy part, but I mean, I can see it as someone who has built a career on counting stuff like window glass and nails, that you could be like, oh my gosh, we are definitely in redundancy. How many thousands of rusty nails do we really need to know about?
Well, I think
I did one where there was wire. We had to save the wire.
Kibbles of wire.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think one thing to remember with data recovery is not always necessary. If you have a resource, you look around and let's say we know what the resource is. And the idea is that you're trying to capture information that would be helpful in a more comprehensive, complex understanding of that period of time. So if that's not going to be helped with your data recovery, sometimes there's an argument that a data recovery is not necessary because you already have that information. And so, I don't think that's one thing that people need to remember is just because you have a resource and it's not avoided, you're not able to avoid it. Now, this doesn't happen very often, but the reason I think it's important, even though it doesn't happen very often, the reason I think it's important is that people have to understand the spirit behind why we do data recovery. We're not just doing data recovery to get the information about that site specifically. If there's any evidence whatsoever that this site might be unique to other sites in the area from the same period, and all the traits are the same, you have to have a reason why you're excavating this site. And why is that important? That's important because there's, sometimes the impact isn't really like you're grading the whole thing. Sometimes it's just limited impact. So you have to decide, what really does need to be, what really does need to be excavated. And so there's so many thoughts that go into that. It's not just, we have a site, now we have to data recover the entire site. And I think a lot of people understand that, but I think people on especially if you're new to archaeology or CRM, you just think that it's a blanket data recovery across an entire site when that's not the case. There's so many other decision makers. Yeah.
I love that whole idea, Heather, of like the site significance and the spirit of the law. Like that's what it's really all about underneath all of it. And I think we've all been on projects from time to time where they just long forgot that and are just sort of doing some weird thing by rote, So
especially historic sites, like historic sites, everything. Sometimes, not always, but you know everything.
You don't know everything.
You never know everything. You're right. But do you know enough is what you're going to excavate? And listen, I know some people may argue this, but you do have a responsibility to not burden a client with an excavation that's going to add nothing to the archaeological record. Really.
No,
you don't. And so these data recoveries are expensive. They're expensive at this.
This is a two-way street. I can't just do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing is that, we're seeing more and more, at least here in California, where the tribes are saying, okay, listen, I want to know what is going to be the impact on this site, and what you're doing here. I'd rather you just, be very limited in your data recovery efforts. And let's only really, I think the attitude towards data recovery has changed. Yeah. Especially depending on what the impact's going to be.
Right. Chris, what's up?
Okay. So I think I'll just close out this segment with a little comment that brings it full circle back to something Bill was mentioning in segment 1. And that is, like Heather's saying too, what's the reason for the data recovery? Well, the reason for even going there to begin with is preservation, right? I mean, that's the whole thing we're trying to do here is preservation. So what's the best way to preserve a site? Is it to avoid it? Is it to dig it all up because they're going to go deep enough that they're going to destroy it? Or is it to, and Native Americans I know would prefer this in most cases, is it to just cap the site off if it's not going to be impacted? Like Bill was saying, are you not going to the levels of the cultural significance? Are you not hitting those levels with your disturbance? Then just cap it off. No one's ever going to see it again, probably, but that's fine. That's usually the way people prefer it.
Sometimes that's not, that's not feasible, right?
Of course.
An archaeological cap is considered avoidance, at least in some area, right? That's avoidance. So, but if that's not feasible, then that's where the data recovery, the actual excavation comes in.
Totally.
I would say in modern buildings these days, it's really hard to sell that because these things go down so deep because they're big, they're heavy, they need big footings and foundations. The chances of you staying above any sort of cultural layer is probably pretty slim, but it's still a possibility, I guess. Yeah.
But in a case where you're only building a Walmart that's going to have, a 200,000 square foot footprint, but the rest is going to be parking lot. Perhaps we only excavate right where they're going to put in the Walmart and all its utility lines.
Yeah.
Right. That was one thing that I think is important to really quickly define. What does feasible mean? Because people are going to say, well, everything's feasible. Everything's avoidable, right? Just don't do it. Well, that's not the case. People don't realize that there's so many other factors that come into play when it comes to development. So when we're doing development, especially with the housing crisis we have right now, if you have a piece of property, you have to have a certain amount of, housing units, right, within your plot in order to get a grant or in order to meet a certain regulation. And then that leads to, sometimes you have limitations. You can only have a building a certain height. And then you have, the limitations as far as our requirements when it comes to parking and having to have a certain amount of parking. So it is absolutely possible to have a situation where you cannot avoid a resource. And so now, obviously, you can also you have things for, you have to have infrastructure, you have to have utility trenches. All these things are factors that come into play. So sometimes I think people are like, it's hard to understand. How come you can't avoid it? How come that's not feasible? That doesn't make sense. Of course it's avoidable. Just don't do it. Well, it doesn't always work that way. But obviously, putting something, a parking lot in an area where a resource is always a very good option, unless that resource is in an area where you have no choice.
Yeah.
Heather, I support everything you're saying in all construction, just as long as it's not in my backyard. Okay. I totally support it, though. Yeah, I'm totally
Thanks for
with
being
you.
transparent there,
I'm
Andrew.
right there.
All right, guys. Well, the other thing that's not avoidable is the end of this podcast. So let's take this to
no matter how
take
hard
this to
we try.
Exactly. Let's take this to next time. In the meantime, help us out by going over to archpodnet.com/members. Check out our membership site. And with that, we will see you guys next time.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at archpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
See you later.
Thanks for listening.
See you guys next time.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.